The void of space stood silent, vast, and uncaring, until the Zirathan fleet arrived. Thousands of warships emerged from the darkness, their hulking forms blotting out distant stars. The coalition of free species had known this day would come. They had prepared for it, but deep down, they understood the truth. This was the end. Xerxes IV, a barren, strategically vital world, was their last line of defense. Surrounding it, a ragged assembly of warships floated in tight formations. Battle-scarred, outdated, and hopelessly outnumbered, the coalition fleet made one last stand against the inevitable. Inside the command center of the flagship Veilthon, Supreme Admiral Carvos of the Draylan Confederacy studied the tactical displays. The enemy was advancing, faster than expected. His second-in-command, a Sarnak officer, exhaled sharply, the twin ridges on her brow furrowing. They are not even hesitating. They know we have no chance. Carvos clenched his mandibles. We fight anyway. The first barrage came like a storm. Pulses of annihilation streaked across the void, carving through coalition lines like fire through dry grass. Ships detonated in rapid succession, dozens in the first few minutes. The comm channels filled with last words, desperate pleas, and resignation. The Zirathans did not bother with demands for surrender. This was extermination. Carvos issued rapid commands, directing what few remaining forces they had into defensive positions. It was a delaying tactic at best. He knew the truth. There was no retreat, no reinforcements. The entire galaxy had abandoned them, and soon their species would join the long list of civilizations wiped from existence. Then, something impossible happened. A distortion rippled through space, a rupture that split the battlefield apart like a wound in reality itself. Energy signatures spiked, readings flaring into the red. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't Zirathan reinforcements. It was something else. Then it arrived. A single warship emerged from the anomaly. Not a fleet, not a reinforcement force. Just one vessel. It was enormous, rivaling the Zirathan dreadnoughts in size, yet its design was unlike anything ever seen. Smooth, angular, devoid of external weaponry, its dark surface shimmered under distant starlight, shifting between hues of blue and black. It bore no identification codes, no transmission signal, no known markings. A ghost in the void. The battlefield froze. Both sides, predator and prey, stared at the newcomer in equal confusion. No one moved. No one spoke. Then the Zirathans, ever ruthless, broke the silence. A full battle group, armed with the deadliest weapons in the Dominion's arsenal, pivoted and fired. Their plasma lances struck true. Direct hits across the newcomer's hull. For the first time in the battle, Carvos dared to hope. Perhaps this was some unknown ally, a secret project of one of the long-fallen empires. But as the flames cleared, his hope turned to disbelief. The warship had taken no damage. The energy dissipated harmlessly across its hull, absorbed into its structure, like a raindrop vanishing into the ocean. Then it retaliated. A single, controlled burst of energy lanced forward, cutting through the lead Zirathan battleship like a blade through paper. No shields flared. No countermeasures activated. The ship simply ceased to exist, ripped apart at the molecular level. The surrounding vessels hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for another shot. Another ship vanished. Then another. Panic rippled through the Zirathan ranks. These were warlords who had never known fear. But now, something they could not understand had arrived, something that did not play by the same rules. The unknown warship pivoted, its movement smooth and deliberate. It wasn't reacting to the battlefield. It was controlling it. Every shot it fired was precise, calculated, methodical. The Zirathans unleashed their full might upon it, desperate to break through its defenses, but it moved too fast. Its hull shrugged off devastation that would have reduced planets to dust. Then a transmission came through, clear, deliberate, and in perfect common galactic standard. This is the UHS Vengeance. The enemy will be eliminated. Silence followed. Then, across the coalition fleet, a ripple of stunned realization. Humans, a name spoken only in myths. A race long believed extinct, wiped from history's records. But if this warship was truly human, then everything they knew about galactic power was a lie. On the Zirathan flagship, Grand Warlord Zakna watched the massacre unfold in stunned disbelief. He had never once in his life considered retreat. He had conquered 100 worlds, crushed empires beneath his claws. But now his instincts screamed one thing: flee. "Pull back," he ordered, his voice tight. "Pull back." His second-in-command, a hulking Zirthan warrior, blinked in shock. "We outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. Zakna's claws tightened against the armrest of his command throne. And yet, they do not run. They do not hide. That is not an enemy to be underestimated. The battlefield had changed. The war had changed. The UHS Vengeance had arrived. The battlefield remained frozen, an unnatural silence gripping both sides. The UHS Vengeance hovered in the void, its sleek, black hull absorbing the faint glow of distant stars. It did not move like other warships. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary thruster adjustments. It floated with intent, like a predator scanning the field before striking again. On the Veilthun, Admiral Carvo struggled to process what he had just witnessed. One ship, against an armada, standing untouched while Zirthan battleships disintegrated under its firepower. This was beyond strategy, beyond tactics. This was something else entirely. "We need to contact them," his communications officer muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Carvos nodded. "Send priority hail. Now." The request went out, but the human warship did not respond. It simply continued its methodical destruction. The Zirthans, however, had recovered from their initial shock. Prideful and ruthless, they refused to accept the impossible. 100 warships turned, bringing the full might of the Dominion to bear against this lone intruder. The first wave came in tight formations, dozens of Interceptor-class vessels, nimble and deadly, moving in a swarm meant to overwhelm any target. The Vengeance did not move. Then, without warning, the space around it ignited. From a warship's smooth hull, unseen weapons emerged. Beams of energy, crackling and almost silent, lanced outward in all directions. There was no visible firing mechanism, no turrets, no missile bays, just pure instantaneous destruction. Every Interceptor-class ship in the attack wave ceased to exist. One moment, they were there. The next, only debris remained. No shields activated. No distress signals were sent. The Zirthan pilots never even had a chance to react. Inside the flagship of the Dominion fleet, Warlord Zakna's breathing grew shallow. His claws gripped the edges of his command throne as his secondary hearts pounded against his ribcage. The Zirthan Dominion had ruled through superiority and fear. They had never encountered a force beyond their own comprehension. How are they firing without weapon emplacements? His tactical officer rasped, scanning frantically. Their weapons, another officer whispered, eyes wide. They don't use conventional mounts. The ship itself is the weapon. Zakna's eyes narrowed. He forced down his fear. If their weapons were beyond understanding, then brute force was the only answer. Deploy the Titan-class dreadnoughts. Crush them with overwhelming power. From a Zirthan fleet, 5 colossal dreadnoughts moved into position, each one larger than the city. These were the galaxy's most feared war machines, the same class of ships that had reduced entire worlds to molten husks. They fired simultaneously. A volley of devastation tore through space. Planet-cracking railguns, antimatter warheads, black hole generators. Any single one of these weapons was designed to erase fleets, to shatter moons. For the first time, the UHS Vengeance moved. Not in a conventional sense. It vanished. A blink, a ripple in space, and suddenly it was behind the dreadnoughts. Instantaneous repositioning. No jump signatures. No gravitational disturbances. It had simply ceased to exist in one place and reappeared in another. The Titan-class dreadnoughts never had a chance. The human warship fired once. Just once. A pulse of violet energy expanded outward in perfect silence. It did not explode. It did not ripple. It consumed. All 5 dreadnoughts imploded into themselves, compressed into fragments no larger than a man's hand. In seconds, the most powerful weapons of the Zirthan Dominion were gone. Carvos and his bridge crew watched in stunned silence. The Coalition forces, battered and broken, could only witness what should have been impossible. And then, for the first time, the UHS Vengeance spoke again. A transmission cut across all frequencies, its voice clear, human, and utterly devoid of emotion. This engagement is concluded. Zirthan forces have been neutralized. Galactic balance must be restored. The words weren't just a declaration. They were a judgment. On the Zirthan flagship, Zaknar rose from his throne, his chest heaving, his mind scrambling for explanations. He had lived his entire life believing his people were the dominant force of the universe. Now, that reality was crumbling before his eyes. With slow, deliberate movement, he turned to his crew. Withdraw. Immediately. His officers hesitated, stunned by the command. The Dominion never retreated. Zaknar roared, his voice filled with rage, with fear, with something he'd never felt before, humiliation. Do it. Now. The Zirthan fleet broke ranks, their once unshakable formations unraveling into chaos as ships turned and fled. The mighty armada that had conquered 100 worlds was running. Carvos inhaled sharply as he watched the impossible unfold. They're leaving, his second-in-command whispered. They're retreating, Carvos corrected. And for the first time in his life, he saw something no one had ever witnessed. Zirthans in fear. And it wasn't just the Dominion. Every species in the Coalition who had ever heard of humanity, who had dismissed them as legend, as myth, now had irrefutable proof. Humanity had returned, and they had come back as something the galaxy had never seen before. The battle was over. The Zirthan fleet, once the scourge of the galaxy, had been routed, forced into a chaotic retreat. Coalition warships, battered and broken, floated in stunned silence. Victory had come, but not by their hands. On the Veilthun, Admiral Carvos watched the retreating enemy forces with something he never imagined he would feel. Disbelief. He had spent his life preparing for this battle, knowing it would be his last. Yet here he stood, still breathing, still alive, because of a warship that should not exist. The UHS Vengeance remained motionless in the void. It had not pursued the fleeing enemy. It had not spoken again. It simply waited. "We have to reach them," Carvos muttered. "We need to know what they are." His communications officer hesitated. They ignored our last transmission. If they wanted to talk, wouldn't they have done so by now? Carvos clenched his mandibles. Send it again. Higher priority. No encryption. Open channel. The message was sent. Silence followed. 5 seconds. 10. Then, a response. The voice returned, as cold and precise as before. Communication accepted. This is the UHS Vengeance. Your survival is confirmed. Galactic stability must be enforced. Carvos hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "We are grateful for your assistance, but we need answers. Who are you? Why are you here?" A pause. Then, humanity has returned. The threat index of this sector exceeded acceptable parameters. Zirthan Dominion deemed unsustainable. The bridge fell silent. Humanity. The name alone sent a chill through every officer present. It was forbidden history, a story told in whispers, dismissed as fiction, buried by time. "Impossible," Carvos muttered. "The human race vanished centuries ago." The voice responded immediately. "Incorrect. Humanity was removed from galactic affairs. Now we return." Something in that phrasing sent a ripple of unease through the crew. Removed? By whom? And why? Carvos straightened. "Are you here as our allies?" The response came with the weight of inevitability. Humanity is not an ally. Humanity is not an enemy. Humanity is a correction. The word sent a shiver down Carvos' spine. This was not a fleet arriving to reclaim lost territory. This was something else. On the Zirthan flagship, Warlord Zakna had abandoned all thought of retaliation. His fleet had suffered an unthinkable defeat. But his mind was not on the battle. It was on the message. Humanity had been removed, which meant someone, somewhere, had feared them. "Find out where that ship came from," Zakna snarled. "I want every record, every archive. I want to know who erased them and why." His officers hesitated before nodding. If the Dominion was to survive, They had to understand what they were facing, what had returned from the abyss. Across the galaxy, the repercussions of this battle spread like wildfire. News of the UHS Vengeance reached every ruling council, every empire, every species that had ever feared the Zirithan Dominion. Some celebrated, believing a new protector had emerged. Others, the more cautious, understood the truth. This was not a protector. This was a force of correction. And the true question remained, what had driven humanity into the darkness for so long? And more importantly, why had they come back now? The echoes of the battle rippled across the galaxy. The Zirithan Dominion, the once unstoppable war machine that had crushed empires, had suffered something more than just defeat. They had been humbled, broken, forced to flee, and they had fled from one ship. Across the fractured remains of the battlefield, the surviving coalition forces drifted in stunned silence. The war was supposed to end in their annihilation. Instead, it had ended with the arrival of something far worse than extinction, a revelation. On the Veilthun, Admiral Carvos leaned forward, his mandibles clicking as he tried to find the right words. He had fought dozens of campaigns, seen his people pushed to the brink, but nothing had prepared him for this. The UHS Vengeance had not left. It simply remained there, motionless, as if waiting. Human vessel. Carvos finally spoke into the comms, forcing the wave of his thoughts into words. You said humanity was removed. By whom? A pause. The silence stretched, tension thick across the bridge. Then, the voice returned. The Galactic Accord of 3000 C declared humanity a Class X civilization, uncontrollable, unpredictable, a threat to galactic stability. Carvos inhaled sharply. He had heard of the Galactic Accord every civilization had. It was a foundation of interstellar law. But nowhere in any historical archive had there been mention of humanity's classification. What happened to you? Carvos pressed. Why were you removed? For the first time, a slight delay before the response. Humanity was exiled. The Accord deemed us incompatible with peaceful coexistence. The war machine was dismantled. The fleets were disbanded. A final warning was issued, do not return. Carvos and his bridge crew stared at each other. Their minds raced with the implications. But you did return, Carvos muttered. The voice remained calm, absolute, correct. A chill spread across the bridge. But why now? Carvos asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Another silence. Then, the Accord is no longer enforced. The galaxy has forgotten its own warnings. We return to restore balance. Carvos' breath caught. This was not an act of vengeance. This was not retaliation. This was something worse. The UHS Vengeance had come not to conquer, but to correct. On the fleeing Zirithan flagship, Warlord Zaknah's thoughts churned. He had spent his life believing in one truth. The Dominion was the apex. They ruled because they were superior. But now, another truth had emerged. They were never the monsters in the dark. They were merely the latest ones to take the throne. And now, the true monsters had returned. A deep, unfamiliar feeling settled in his gut, one his kind had never experienced. Fear. As the remnants of the battle drifted in silence, a final transmission echoed across the stars. Not a declaration, not a demand, just a warning. Humanity was patient. Humanity was silent. No longer. Then, without another word, the UHS Vengeance vanished, disappearing into the void as if it had never been there. But its presence would never be forgotten. The war was over. A new era had begun.